The life, legacy, and leadership of Lemuz Braille.
Many years ago, most people thought there was no way for blind people to read. The only way they thought it was possible was by looking at the words with their eyes. This, of course, could have not been done by the blind and visually impaired.
This individual changed it all.
Lemuz Braille was a French lad. He desperately wanted to read despite having been blind from the age of 3. Braille knew that there was a world beyond his disability and was strong-willed to find the path to all the knowledge and ideas. His goal was to find a way to reach this world for him and for all other blind people.
Lemuz Braille was born in 1809 in a small village near Paris called Couvray. Lemuz's father often used sharp tools while he worked. One of the tools he used was a sharp awl.
While playing with one of his father's awls one day, Lemuz's hand slipped and he accidentally poked one of his eyes. At first the injury did not seem serious, but soon the wound became infected. A few days later, 3-year-old Lemuz lost sight in both of his eyes.
The first few days after becoming blind were very difficult and Lemuz grappled with his life. But as the days and weeks went by, he learned to adapt and live an otherwise normal life. He went to school daily with his friends and did well in his studies. He was a bright, intelligent, and creative boy that did not let his disability get in his way. Lemuz Braille thought that anyone could live a full life if given the chances. He once said, "Live without seeing, but be what you are."
As Lemuz got older, his life at a normal school became a problem for him, and he sought to go to a school for the blind. When he arrived at the special school in Paris, the Royal Institute for the Blind Youth, he found that the school did have books for the blind to read.
These books had large letters that raised up off the page. Since the letters were big, the books were large and bulky, and very expensive to buy. They were a bit difficult for the blind to handle, but they were the only resources available then.
The school had exactly 14 of these books, and Lemuz set to read all 14. To read, he had to feel each letter, and it took too long to read one sentence, nevertheless a paragraph or a chapter. Lemuz said to himself that there had to be a better way and sought to find a solution for an upgraded method for the blind to read.
One day hope came. Someone at the school heard about an alphabet code that was being used by the French army. This code allowed for the officers to deliver messages to soldiers at night without having to strike up a match to read it. The light from the match would show the enemy a target to shoot at. The alphabet code was made from symbols that were small dots and dashes that raised off the paper so the soldiers can read them by touch. Once the soldiers understood the code, it worked.
Lemuz tried some of this code. It was an improvement compared to the books at school, but the army code was still slow and took up too much space on the paper. He knew that he could add and fix this code to make it easier.
During his next vacation home, Lemuz decided to experiment and discover a new method of reading and writing for the blind. He liked the idea of raised dots, so he took that idea and sat there in his father's shop. A brilliant idea occurred to him, and he spent the next few days with one of his father's awls, creating a completely new alphabet made entirely of only 6 dots. The placement of the different dots in different combinations would represent the different letters of the alphabet.
Lemuz tried out his newly invented Braille alphabet and was pleased to discover that it worked. It was easier and improved and used less space than the school books. A quote from Lemuz Braille is, "Yesterday was the greatest and most beautiful days of my life. I tasted the greatest joys. God was pleased to hold before my eyes the dazzling splendors of eternal hope. After that, doesn't it seem that nothing more can keep me bound to the earth?"
Lemuz Braille's invention continues to be used in countries around the world as a system for the blind and the visually impaired, and has also made life become easier to live through. Although Braille is not a universal language, as many people would assume, there are languages that use the same alphabet. Like American Sign Language, Braille is written in different languages, not in its own.
Many visually impaired people around the world use Braille. The way Braille works is it has something called cells that are made of 6 dot patterns. It is arranged in 2 columns of 3 dots each, making 64 combinations. There are 2 different grades in Braille. The first one is the regular one that has normal print letters from the Braille alphabet. Then grade 2 is a shorter version where common words that are short are given abbreviations. These abbreviations make Braille writing and reading faster. There are also styluses and slates that are used to write Braille. The way you read Braille is by placing your finger over the writing and moving your hand as you
Braille's invention has come to continuously inspire new and innovative projects that help contribute and build a world that is more exclusive for people with disabilities. Louis Braille once said, "Braille is knowledge, and knowledge is power."
Braille, the system of reading and writing created by Louis Braille, has assisted many individuals get through their daily lives. Unlike before, the blind and visually impaired living today can travel and live in an otherwise normal life.
Some of these inventions that have helped the blind and visually impaired living today are Perkins Brailler, Braille slates and styluses, Braille music transcriptions, tactile watches, Braille Wave, and Web Braille. These modern inventions shows how Louis Braille has inspired more tools for visually impaired people living today.
Louis Braille guided and led other blind and visually impaired people with his Braille invention. He was like a leader and created a system that would benefit the blind. Through his system that would benefit the blind, he was able to guide many visually impaired people through their daily routines. He has left a legacy and continues to impact our world.
Louis Braille left a legacy that has affected thousands of people. For hundreds of years, the ability of blind people was limited due to the unavailable access to written and printed forms of information. Although many others contributed to the accomplishment, no one revolutionized the way blind people would perceive and contribute to the world as Louis did.
Here's a modern-day example of how Louis Braille has impacted the lives of the blind and visually impaired. Here, as it is shown, they are putting the paper under a metal template. This is to press a copy of the Braille writing onto the paper. Later, these would be rolled over to get the wanted shape. Once rolled, they are binded and are sent out for the blind to use.